In the rolling hills of Missouri Territory in 1878, 17-year-old Eli Jackson, wiry and quiet, was more than just a farmer's kid. He could clean a rifle at dawn and rebuild a fence line by dusk, having handled firearms since before he could spell. When the notorious Iron Ridge gang rode into town, they underestimated him, a mistake that would cost them dearly. Eli's father, Asa, a Union Army scout and marksman, had taught him everything he knew about shooting, tracking, and reading the land. Asa's parting lesson echoed in Eli's mind. Always let him think you're harmless, boy. There's power in being underestimated. The whispers of the Iron Ridge gang had reached Pine Hollow 3 days prior. Known for their brutal efficiency, they left robbed banks and grieving families in their wake. Sheriff Kate Henderson had visited Eli's farm under the guise of buying eggs and warned him they were headed their way. That evening, Eli took down his father's Winchester Model 1873, a sacred relic gleaming in the setting sun. He practiced his marksmanship, punching holes through playing cards at 50 paces, his hands steady, his breath even. The next morning, as Eli carried a basket of eggs, the sound of horses stopped him. 5 riders approached, the Iron Ridge gang. Eli forced himself to look small and unimposing. The lead rider, Jeremiah Cross, stopped at the gate. "Morning, kid," he drawled. "Name's Jeremiah Cross. My boys and I been riding all night. Reckon we could trouble you for some water for the horses?" Eli nodded quickly, pitching his voice higher than usual. "Yes, sir. The well's over by the barn. Help yourself." As the men dismounted, Eli stayed by the gate, overhearing snippets of their conversation. "Easy target. No neighbors for miles. Look at that scrawny kid." The youngest gang member wandered over. "Dangerous out here for a boy on his own," he said with false concern. "Bandits and such." Eli forced a nervous smile. "I manage okay." Jeremiah leaned on the fence. "Kid, your name wouldn't happen to be Jackson, would it? Related to Asa Jackson?" Eli's fingers tightened on the basket handle. "He was my pa." Jeremiah chuckled. "Not personally, but I heard of him. A legend with a rifle, they said. Shame the army took back all his medals when he died." The other men laughed. Jeremiah's eyes flicked to the farmhouse. "That Winchester up there, heard tell it was army-issued. Valuable piece. Seems to me a boy like you doesn't need something that fine. We'd be happy to take it off your hands for a fair price." Eli swallowed hard, letting his lip tremble. I don't think I could." Jeremiah stepped closer, his hand on his Colt. "Tell you what, why don't you show us what that rifle can do? Prove you're worthy of keeping it." He pulled a playing card from his pocket. "Ace of spades, 20 paces, hit it and we leave you be." The gang's laughter echoed. The shot cracked and the ace of spades exploded. Silence fell. Jeremiah's smirk vanished. His hand moved toward his Colt, but Eli had already shifted the rifle to cover him. "I wouldn't," Eli said, his voice calm and firm now. "My pa taught me to shoot clean. You'll lose that hand before you draw." The youngest gang member stepped back, his hands raised. I don't want trouble." Jeremiah's eyes narrowed. "You played us, didn't you?" "You played yourselves," Eli replied, his aim steady. "Underestimated me. My father always said that was the biggest mistake anyone could make." The standoff stretched into heavy silence. Finally, Jeremiah raised his hands. "Easy now, kid. No need for anyone to get hurt." "Drop your guns," Eli commanded. The gang obeyed. "Ropes inside the barn?" Eli nodded. "You'll tie yourselves up nice and tight. And if anyone gets any ideas, remember this, I don't miss." The gang hesitated, but the cold steel of the Winchester convinced them. As they moved, Eli glanced toward the horizon. He'd seen the sheriff's signal, 3 short flashes from a mirror. Help was on its way. By the time Sheriff Henderson and his deputies arrived, the Iron Ridge gang was secured in the barn. "Reckon we owe you thanks, Eli," the sheriff said. "You've done Pine Hollow proud." Eli nodded, his gaze distant. The morning mist had burned away. His father's rifle hung from his shoulder. But as he watched the deputies load the gang into wagons, Eli knew this wasn't over. Jeremiah's parting words echoed in his ears. "You think this is the worst of it, kid? You've no idea what's coming. It gets crazy. It gets worse." Eli tightened his grip on the rifle. Whatever came next, he'd be ready. As the wagons disappeared over the ridge, Eli took a deep breath. The excitement was fading, replaced by a quiet unease. The Iron Ridge gang might be captured, but Jeremiah's words weren't just bluster. Eli had read enough in his father's old letters to know that men like Jeremiah rarely worked alone. Inside the farmhouse, he found the cedar chest beneath his bed. Inside lay his father's war mementos. Eli unfolded a map Asa had used during his scouting days. On it were marks and notes about key locations in the territory, places where Asa believed trouble could brew. One mark stood out, a circle around a place called Ridge Hollow. Eli traced the name with his finger. Ridge Hollow wasn't far from Pine Hollow, just a half-day's ride. His father's notes mentioned it as a supply hub for outlaws. If Jeremiah's threats meant anything, Ridge Hollow could hold the answers Eli needed. He spent the afternoon preparing. The Winchester was cleaned again, each round inspected. He filled his saddlebags with provisions and strapped a knife to his belt. By sunset, Eli was mounted and ready. He turned back once to his farmhouse, a silhouette against the fiery sunset. He patted his horse's neck, a sturdy Appaloosa named Whiskey, and whispered, "Let's ride, boy." The journey to Ridge Hollow was uneventful, but Eli remained vigilant. He scanned the horizon for any sign of pursuit, his senses heightened. As darkness fell, he navigated by the stars, his father's lessons guiding him. Ridge Hollow was a cluster of ramshackle buildings nestled in a narrow canyon. A single flickering light spilled from the saloon's windows, casting long shadows that danced with the rustling wind. Eli dismounted Whiskey a safe distance away, tethering him to a thicket of brush. He approached the settlement cautiously, his movements fluid and silent. The saloon's raucous laughter and clinking glasses spilled into the night. Eli peered through a dusty window, observing the scene inside. Rough-looking men filled the room, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of lanterns. He recognized some faces from the Iron Ridge gang, men who had escaped the sheriff's roundup. Jeremiah was nowhere to be seen. Eli's gaze settled on a burly man with a scarred face, seated at a corner table. He seemed to be the leader of this group. Eli decided to gather information before making any move. He slipped into the shadows circling the saloon. He found an open window near the back where he could eavesdrop on the conversation inside. "Jeremiah said we'd be fools to stay in one place," the scarred man said, his voice gruff. "He's got a bigger plan, something that'll make us richer than we ever dreamed." "What is it?" another man asked eagerly. "He didn't say," the scarred man replied, "just that we need to be ready when he gives the signal." The conversation confirmed Eli's suspicions. Jeremiah was planning something bigger, and Ridge Hollow was just a small part of it. He needed to find Jeremiah to uncover his plan. As the night deepened, the saloon's activity dwindled. One by one, the patrons stumbled out, heading to their respective hideouts. Eli waited patiently, observing their movements. When the last light flickered out, he knew it was time to act. He slipped into the saloon, now empty and silent. He searched the tables and rooms, looking for any clue about Jeremiah's whereabouts. Finally, he found a crudely drawn map tucked under a table. It showed a series of landmarks connected by a winding trail. At the end of the trail was a large X, marked with the words Jeremiah's hideout. Eli memorized the map, then carefully replaced it. He left the saloon as silently as he had entered, his mind racing. He knew he had to follow that trail to find Jeremiah and stop whatever he was planning. The journey was long and arduous, leading him through treacherous terrain. But Eli was determined, driven by a sense of responsibility to protect his community. Finally, he reached the location marked on the map, a hidden cave nestled deep within a rocky canyon. He dismounted Whiskey, tethering him to a nearby tree. He approached the cave cautiously, his senses on high alert. Inside the cave, a fire crackled, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Jeremiah sat by the fire, his face grim. He was surrounded by his gang, their faces hardened and determined. Eli knew he was outnumbered, but he couldn't back down. He stepped into the light, his rifle raised. "Jeremiah," he said, his voice echoing through the cave. "It's over." Jeremiah's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. "You again, kid?" he sneered. "You just won't quit, will you?" "Not when there's still work to be done," Eli replied, his aim steady. The gang members rose to their feet, their hands moving towards their weapons, but Jeremiah stopped them with a wave of his hand. "Hold it," he said, his eyes locked on Eli. "This is between me and the kid." Jeremiah stepped forward, his hand moving towards the Colt peacemaker tucked in his waistband. But Eli was faster. He fired a single shot, the bullet hitting Jeremiah's hand, causing him to drop the gun. Jeremiah cried out in pain, clutching his bleeding hand. Eli kept his rifle trained on him, his expression unwavering. "You're finished, Jeremiah," he said. The other gang members hesitated, unsure what to do. They looked at their leader, then back at Eli, their faces filled with fear and uncertainty. Finally, one by one, they dropped their weapons. Eli had won. Disclaimer: all stories shared on this channel are entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes. We advocate for a world where everyone has equal rights under the law, and where society continues to grow in fairness, development, and civilization. Our goal is to share heartwarming stories that contribute to making life better. Any resemblance to real events, individuals, or organizations is purely coincidental and unintentional. These stories are not meant to reference any actual people, events, or entities, and contain no political or religious connotations. Thank you so much for watching and supporting Story Karma. Your engagement, whether it's watching, liking, commenting, or sharing, helps us continue bringing you powerful stories of crime, justice, and karma. We truly appreciate each and every one of you for being part of this journey. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Your support keeps this channel going, and we can't wait to share more incredible stories with you.